Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of CFO Stack. Jason, welcome again. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Awesome. And today with us we have Luis Rieti. Luis, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Great. Today we want to cover a little bit of the stack in general of the CFO. Both Jason and Luis, they have a great experience in multiple tech companies in the financial departments as well in the technology department. So we can start, Luis, with you, sharing if you could share with us a little bit your background. I know it didn't start necessarily in finance, but the numbers took your attention somehow. So if you can share some context in here, we will much appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, my pleasure. So to try to keep it as brief as possible, I immigrated to the U.S. from Honduras in undergrad. Actually, I just wanted to really have an adventure and to get to know myself better. So I decided to get a general business degree without any specialization, and I did come from a family of more, I guess, entrepreneurs, and I figured at some point I'll figure out what to get into, as long as it's in business. um, Coming out of that undergrad degree, uh, the only clarity I have was I need to understand how business works in the U.S. and I thought that there was no better way to do that than to get into sales. And so I did. I did just that. Uh, I got into some entry level sales roles. At first, my first proper sales job was working for a professional soccer franchise, FC Dallas. So it was really fun, and it was one of my big passions. It still is, but it was kind of a nice experience to be able to combine those two things, soccer and business. It ended up not being really successful, not because of anything I did, but at the time the MLS was just, you know, the redheaded stepchild that nobody cared about in the U.S. And so,
You say that like it's changed.
oh, it
Like
has. It
I'm teasing.
absolutely has. I mean, I think the market appeal of soccer today in the U.S. is more than 10 times what it was when I was working. Um, much more, actually. And so, but at the time, that was the potential that everyone knew was there. We just didn't know how to unlock it, right? And so, uh, past that tangent, I had a couple other sales roles. It wasn't till I got into what I consider a pretty high growth tech startup. Um, I got a job as a strategic account manager at a lead generation company that had been started, I think, in 2007, 2008. And when I joined around 2011, it was already hitting 100 million in revenue. So super fast growth. And what I really liked about this company was it was one of the tenets was we're data driven, and it wasn't just a sentence. They actually, applied it, right? We had a daily metrics briefing for the whole company. It was optional. Um, but every day we would review all sorts of mostly operating and some financial metrics as a group in a big theater. So it was kind of cool. And anyone could ask questions and contribute. So it was a really positive culture in that sense. And so I was tasked with managing a particular channel, a revenue channel. And the nice thing is I was also given a lot of um, autonomy to make business decisions, including pricing decisions, certain product decisions, and obviously always negotiating with the clients. I had some larger clients as well as some mid-sized clients that I was all trying to grow. And so what I realized was because of the culture of the company, I was given access to some pretty well-structured operating data and some financial data as an account manager. And all I needed to do was learn how to work Excel, and connecting through an OLAP data cube connection to Excel. And I also was given access to SQL, right? So two things that don't usually happen to a salesperson, but somehow I just happened to be in that position, and I really had fun with it. So I started to do my own analysis, and kind of, because it was a data-driven business, uh, working really in marketing, I was I was constantly looking for opportunities for pricing arbitrage, for supply and demand arbitrage of any kind, really. And like I said earlier, I was given the power to execute strategies. And so all this led to really positive results. I would say I had a lot of success in the company. And this is what told me, I got to change my career. So the
So
process
I
of
got to
change.
ask real quick:
Yeah.
did your numbers from a sales perspective improve, or was it like the sales numbers declined, but the company improved, so they had to move you over to finance? I gotta know how this worked.
Yeah. So both the company and my own book of business grew uh, pretty well. But my channel's growth was the highest growing channel in the company. So I was growing much faster than the company. I
So
think when I,
folks took notice, to say the least.
that's right,
Okay.
absolutely. I think when I started, my portfolio was between 2 to 4 million in annualized revenue, and when I left, yeah, it was in the 40s, and that was over a period of 2.5 years, I think. So
Yeah, that's quick.
yeah, it was great, and basically, obviously, I don't take all the credit for that, because it was I would actually collaborate with our BI team and our product team and our marketing team. So I was very proactive in that sense. I wanted to get people's feedback and help, right? So it certainly wasn't my own doing. Anyways, uh, wanting to switch, right? Easier said than done. I didn't really know how to do that. I didn't even know what to switch into, except I wanted to work with data. So what I did was, I thought I replicated this. Can I replicate the success I've had for this company with other startups, and kind of templatize some of these ideas? And so that's what I tried to do. I started my own advisory company. I partnered with a few people, and I worked with startups, on growth strategy. And that's how I started to get pulled into finance, really. It was by working with startups as a consultant, and inevitably, right, startups that are running very lean and usually don't have a CFO, right? They just need help in that area. And I kind of became a subject matter expert on behalf of them to do so, and even started to help them negotiate capital raises, and buying and selling of companies. I started to work with investors as well. So I somehow transitioned into being almost an investment banker of sorts, which was not necessarily something I knew I was going to do, but it just happened. So after that, I got my MBA because I really kind of wanted to solidify my expertise in this area. And I was fortunate enough to get into Wharton, which is, as you know, really big finance school. And that really taught me a lot. Uh, After that, I tested the waters working for private equity, but then kind of missed being a little bit more operationally involved. And so I landed in a hybrid role between corporate development, FP&A, and just strategic finance, I would call it, right? That's my last traditional corporate role I had, in which, happy to get into all the details on tech stuff. After that role, it was when I joined Cofi with Alex. So today, right, working strongly with Alex on growing Cofi, and also doing some on the private equity side, some deals essentially. So yeah, I think that's good enough for the summary.
Can we go back further? I want to start further back. No, I'm teasing. That was the best introduction summary I've ever heard in my life.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, it's a wonderful autobiography you're going to write someday.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly try to keep it brief because there's a lot of weird things that happen along the way.
The best is, the best is still to come, though, Luis.
Eh,
Uh,
I'm amen.
Jason, do you see any parallelisms here with your background? You as well work a lot in data, then move to finance.
The thing I'm unsurprised at is I've always felt, and I think you and I talked about this on another pod, Alex, but the people that are most successful almost ignore the fact that there are barriers. At least they don't look at them as constraints in terms of, hey, I'm on the sales team. And I figured the answer was both the company and Lewis improved because I didn't really see an outcome where someone in a sales role couldn't then, put an interesting perspective on the data, and then use that to not only patternize like your individual performance, but maybe the performance of that division and another division. So that was pretty epic. I think the other observation is, and not often talked about, but I feel like every good finance leader is also a great salesman in that, like, there's so much negotiation, and you mentioned like being an investment banker. It's like whether it's negotiating debt or even the covenants on the debt or due diligence, like vendor management day to day. I mean, negotiating in sales is basically it's a day to day responsibility for most finance leaders that are in the mix. So also unsurprised by that, and feel like that probably paid you a lot of dividends on both as a salesman and then in your transition into a finance leader.
100% agreed. I would have never imagined it, but it's certainly something I'm thankful for because I use it every day.
Luis, you mentioned that you started with SQL, lab databases. How it's been that transition from the early days that you were managing data all the way till now? Have you seen any changes in the finance side?
Well, that certainly depends on the company. That's what I think is pretty interesting from my experience is just the huge range of I guess perspectives on how different companies choose to manage their tech stack and work with data. Like for example, I've seen companies that are in the 50 to call it $80 million range still relying 80% on Excel, right? Which is kind of mind blowing because at that scale, you would imagine that. And I'm talking about Excel based databases almost, right? With no SQL and no interconnected data warehousing that really combines all the critical operational and financial data. And so I've seen a lot of things, but I think for the companies that are interested in being more efficient, there's been a lot of I think that the innovation of the core data warehousing and architecture has obviously improved things, but it still kind of serves the same function. And then you have your ERPs and your functional software. I think where there's been the most interesting things and innovation happening is in this middleware layer, I think. in connectivity and data aggregation and analytics, right? Looking at all the data sources as well as different just cloud softwares and kind of integrating, bringing it all together. And so, some companies choose to have a custom BI middleware layer created, which can be very powerful, but take a lot of resources and time to build. And then there's a lot of out of the box tools as well that try to solve for it in the same way. So that's what comes to my mind. Jason, what would you say?
Yeah, I would say the thought that came to mind. I remember my first job. I came out of '08 in the financial crisis and had 5 offers rescinded in 5 months, and I was like, yeah, may not happen for me. And
Jesus.
my parents put in an application for me for a temp agency in the county fair, and lo and behold, I got a call for a startup in Ohio. And sure enough, I started as a temp, and they hired me as a financial systems analyst. And best job I ever had. And I needed 2 tools and 2 tools only, and it was SQL and Excel. And
Hmm.
we made the world go round with those 2 tools. But it was also a great lesson in that we uncovered a ton of opportunity, like margin erosion. There was issues with remittance and like overpaying the main vendor and them applying the wrong discounting to the wrong tiered packaging for certain things. But really quickly realized that uh, fastest way to get access to the data, but the trade off was in this like repeatability and like how trustworthy that data was. I remember I had stacked so many different types of analysis where I would like run the query, pull it into Excel. I would go through some manipulations, and then I'd send it off to kind of the board and the exec team. And I remember one Saturday there was something that changed in the structure of the underlying application, and my query didn't change with it, and therefore the Excel model didn't change with it, and some pretty favorable numbers were sent to the CFO. And I remember getting like a 8 a.m. message on a Saturday from a guy named Rob, and he was like, "Yeah, these aren't right," and I had to kind of log in. I mean, this was a long time ago, so I had a remote desktop back then. I had an RDP to what was my desktop at my office because work from home wasn't a thing back then. To try to fix and figure out what the problem was, and it was a lesson in that like not every analysis and not every poll needs these world class tools and systems, but for things that are really important, like the profitability of a business and like how acquisition channels were performing or cash flow, which was what this analysis was about. It needs some extra rigor, and so I got a chance to work with the engineering team, and we got to build in some of these concepts not as my bastard queries and Excel analysis, but as like first class citizens into the data tables themselves and ultimately our application. So definitely it was a great lesson because I learned my love of SQL and Excel, but then I also learned where you can take them too far and maybe not the right application at scale.
Yeah,
Did
that's
that change?
super interesting.
Did that, Jason, change in your last experiences, or it's been similar process, similar stack?
Yeah, I've run into similar problems at pretty much every venture that I've had, although I haven't made the same mistake again in that putting in the lesson I learned in the job after that, because I got to build my own data warehouse and got to essentially say, hey, I'm going to put my accounting and my BI and data engineering hat on. I'm going to build our warehouse to see these metrics produced in near real time so we could get some dashboards. And that was great because then we got to really build a pipeline that was built with engineering rigor that had tests against it. If things were out of balance or something didn't run, it would alert me and some of the folks on the IT team. So really got a chance to learn from that. Now that was a pain in the butt because you didn't have the productization of data movement, data storage, data capture that you have today in a lot of the engineering tools that folks have today. You had basically Microsoft SQL Server, some stored procedures, maybe Toad that you connected to your database to send you emails when certain criteria was met. And like that was our data stack that we use for financial analysis. And I mean, seems archaic standing here today. Was it way better than standalone SQL and Excel? Absolutely. If you compare to what we have today, it looks like the Stone Age. But it was what we needed at the time, and that's the best you had at the time.
And looking into the future, what do you think, Jason, that are the trends? Of course, you're leading with your company that innovation, but overall in general, how do you see the future?
Yeah, I feel like what we saw was in the last, like, let's say 5-ish years is like almost like the productization of data movement that I just alluded to. So you have, companies like Fivetran moving data from A to B, and you can take pretty much like a REST API, a generic API for damn near any software, and then you can get that into, Redshift or AWS. You get that into Postgres database. You can put that anywhere. And then you have things like DBT, like transformation analysis management. And so you essentially can have like, well, how's my extracting and my loading my transformation? How's my transformation happening? And store that in version controlled, jobs, and then you can manage your orchestration. Those are all well and good, but essentially that still requires you in the same framework. I think of there's a business problem, and then that gets translated with requirements, then given to an engineer, and the engineers have way better tools than they've had. Where folks like me that maybe aren't great engineers could even contribute in some sense, and maybe not well, but could contribute. And but honestly, like where I see that going next is even collapsing that productization further, right? Where rather than saying, hey, we're going to move data from A to B and we're going to have an engineer write code, and it's the same problem for everybody connecting to Stripe, right? You need Stripe data because that's where your payments are. You got to figure out where your revenue is because you need a rev rec and you need a financial analysis so you can figure out how you're making money. Are you paid? Are you not paid? And those are all problems that have kind of created themselves with this decentralization of systems. This is no longer all in the ERP, right? They're in Stripe, Braintree, PayPal, money's all over the place. But I think that next step, what it's going to do is it's going to take those data tools and it's going to create an interface to productize accounting, finance folks. And then you won't have as much need for SQL and Excel because you'll be able to create a connection and say, here's the business logic that I want applied to this data source. And then I want my rev rec to be performed. I want this reconciliation to be performed. And it's not that SQL and Excel will go away. It's just that like these common things that we do on a monthly basis with your monthly close, those data tools are going to extend into innovation and they're going to be used by business folks. And so rather than the tools being for the minority, which at this point is the engineering group, it's going to be for the majority, which is the business folks, and it's going to productize a lot of that bespoke work. Uh, which I will say is not to say that like data engineering is going away or like that accountants are going away, but I would equate it similar to bookkeeping, right? If you look at a graph of bookkeeping 50 years ago, right, like that graph has steadily gone down over the last 50 years. And but what's replaced that is analytics, like management accounting, reporting, because the folks are focusing on what they probably should have been in the first place, which is like what's valuable to my business from a data perspective. And you're not burdened by this transactional and data management anymore. So that's my personal perspective on where I think this is going in the short to long term.
Agree. Yeah, definitely seems to me as well that it's going that direction. Luis, what your thoughts on here? How do you see the future?
Um, yeah, I think what Jason explained very well is is something I agree with. Um, I mostly work with smaller and lower middle market companies, and it's it's very interesting to me how there's very commonly this separation of we need to close the books and report on how the company's doing, and there's a mad dash to do that, and then when it comes to actually analyzing performance, which is what finance is supposed to do, right? The numbers are supposed to be ex- create exploratory questions and unearth potential risks and opportunities and all this stuff, right? But so many small businesses are just caught up on like we just have to deliver the numbers and then go back to focusing on sales and marketing and product, right? Like it's almost like there's this separation uh, philosophically, and I think that what Jason is proposing, could really help uh, a lot of small businesses, right? If as more tools become available that make this integration, centralization of data easier, not only to do it, but to work with it, right? Which is just as difficult for small business owners. Then it could really change the competitive landscape entirely, right? And so, anyways, I think that I agree. Excel's not going away. You still for on the fly, analysis. I don't think there's anything that can come close to it. But when we're talking about you know data strategy, which I think Jason seems to me like an expert at, right? Like there's so much potential on how to positively impact the finance role for small businesses that can come from these breakthroughs.
Jason?
Yeah, I think you said something I want to pull on a little bit, but you talked about it's this philosophical line, and I want to say I agree, but I think it's an and. It's philosophical and it's also real. And I'll try to convince you in a little bit of a narrative here, but if you looked at how a business ran 20 years ago, most of those folks had a single system where the customer order contract, this fulfillment was entered. I should say this entitlement. It was fulfilled, so you performed some good or service for the customer, you billed the customer, you were paid by the customer, and along the way, all of this, financial accounting and management accounting and this data was all centralized in one nice, clean place, right? That was the original ERP model, and that's how most businesses operated. And I think what you've seen is a massive and a great decentralization of operational tools that were innovations on behalf of end customers. So, for example, a customer wants to pay with credit card. Okay, well, now a customer wants to be able to pay with any type of credit card and a gift card, or they want to be able to pay with PayPal. They want to be able to pay with PayPal and Affirm and payment plans. And now let's extend that beyond payments. And now they want a contract where they can have, I want month to month, or I want usage based contracts. And now all of a sudden, what used to be this nice, clean, linear manufacturing line, A goes to B, B goes to C, C goes to D, now has been decentralized into you have an invoicing system, you have a contract system, you have a payment system or a whole bunch of payment systems. And then what's been decentralized was the financial intelligence along the way with it. So even though the end customers got a benefit, the businesses actually suffered, and I would argue are worse off. And that's essentially my argument that it's not just philosophical. There's actually a systematic lines, and you could call them network lines and separation that didn't exist in history, and now they do. And therefore we've caused a lot of pain and created some of these deficiencies in communication between the operation and the finance group.
Yep, I have to agree with you, Jason. I think to give an example of something that I think happens super often is, if you have like the company P&L, right, and maybe you code in some business units, but to get to have like a product P&L or a functional P&L based on like sub departments, right? All these ways to look at performance that's connected to all kinds of productivity. It's like forget about it, right? If you're talking to a small business, to like, hey, why don't we analyze, which marketing campaigns have worked best, or which products have the highest margin? Very simple questions that you would assume anyone would be interested in knowing. But because of this, like Jason said, real separation and inability to just merge the right kind of data, it doesn't even factor as a possibility to business owners.
I love your example too, because that's always the juicy one, and it's the request I've gotten as an analyst, and it's always the one that I've wanted when I ran a finance team, which is P&L's great. I see a couple numbers. I'd really like to understand how we got here and how the business drivers or the business components or the business segments got us here. And why is that such a pain in the butt? Like it seems like an obvious second set of questions that I'm going to have, and that's nobody's fault, right? It like wasn't my team's fault. It wasn't the organization's fault. It's just I think a result of the current state of the CFO stack, and that it's been decentralized, and so hey, how's the marketing campaign performing? And I don't mean from a marketing perspective. I mean how's the campaign performing in terms of the language of business, which is accounting and financial reporting. That's damn near an unanswerable question. And yet we have these massive investments in like, customer data platforms for marketing to where we store every piece of metadata on every what the customer does. What we don't have in those databases is a P&L per customer. And so it's like, I love customer data, I love finance data. Can't we have them both and be able to view them both, either cohorted for one or the other with context from one or the other? And I hope we get to see that future. That's the one, obviously, we care a lot about, because your example is no surprise. Like that's the first place you love to look, is like, what's driving my business performance?
And actually, I have a question for you, Jason. So, for a small business that operates in this way with decentralized data sources, and they're over time, have invested in each of them with the hope, right, to get benefit from it. But now, if they realize I'd love to connect all these, and they go out and maybe get a quote from somebody that would have to build some sort of custom, data warehouse uh, and business intelligence, stack that would cost them
And
maybe,
ledger, yeah.
yeah, right, like over $100,000, right? And not only that, but the time it would take, I don't know, 6 to 12 months to implement, and then to change the business processes that are ongoing on a monthly basis. Like, what do you say to that company? Can you think of any advice, any tools, any resources that you would recommend to even have an incremental, improvement?
Sure. So I'm going to try to say this in a way that comes off unbiased, but I fully admit this will be completely biased because it has to do with two things that I make money off of for a living. So, number one, I think a lot of those folks could benefit from a fractional CFO, or really a fractional finance hire, where you're getting a disproportionate amount of the value for a fraction of the cost. And even if that fractional CFO once a month stitches together that data for you, that's still better than you never knowing, or only knowing when you file your taxes, or only having a cash basis view to your business. And I guarantee you, whatever money you spent, you're going to get that 10x back every time that you spend those dollars, and every year you spend those dollars, because of the amount of visibility you're going to have to your business performance. Uh, the second piece of bias from my mouth will be, I think for both Alex and I, that's part of, I think, the vision for productizing a lot of this, is that folks don't, especially if you're a small business, and I think it probably depends on what you mean by a small business, but assuming a small business where you've got at least a meaningful enough amount of revenue to be able to make a couple key hires and invest some dollars. They don't have $100,000, but maybe they have 25,000. And if there was something that could productize connecting to these, and it doesn't take a year, it takes 3 weeks to connect to this data, and to maintain it is someone going in and saying, hey, I added this custom field to this other system. I want that on my P&L. And I hit save, and then now their existing reports update. I feel like that's an investment that they could make, and frankly is a rounding error compared to what they're going to get in value. And I'll leave it at that, so I don't spew any more bias on our wonderful podcast.
That's great. Thanks.
This has been great, Luis, Jason. We're wrapping up in here. So thank you very much for the two of you for joining today.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, Lewis, great chatting with you, and Alex, thanks for having us.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you both.
Thank you, Luis, Jason. Have a good one.
Bye.